Hey there, drone fans. Rick here again from Drone Valley. Today's clip is going to focus on the late-breaking legislation that took place this afternoon that's going to change the way that hobbyists fly in the U.S. Now, if you're not aware of it, late this afternoon, about 5 o'clock East Coast time, the U.S. Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. struck down the FAA's ability to force you to register your quad. Up until that time, if you owned a quad that was between a half a pound and 55 pounds, you had to go to the FAA website, enter a bunch of personal information, pay your $5 registration fee, and then you were given a registration number that had to be in every quad that you flew. Now, I know this has been a very controversial issue. There are people on both sides of it. So I've had a lot of coffee today, and I'm going to talk a lot about it. And I've got some pretty strong opinions on what I think this means today and what it'll mean over the next couple of years. So hopefully not a lot of the bad stuff I think may happen will happen, but we'll get into those details in a minute. So what's changed? As of today, you no longer have to register your quad to fly. Now, this is May 19th, about 8 p.m., 2017. If you're watching this clip after that, always check the local registration requirements because it could change. It's a very fluid situation. But as of today, that's off the table. So it's immediate, no longer registration required. I'm not sure what they're going to do about the 750,000 people that have already registered quads and paid their $5. I think everything's kind of on hold till they decide if they're going to appeal it or not. Now, the reason it was struck down is because the legislation that gave the FAA broader powers to integrate quads and UAVs into the national airspace was based on a 2012 law that gave them pretty broad powers. But in that law specifically, it said that they were not allowed to impact hobbyist drones or hobbyist quads. And the court felt that the FAA registration requirement impacted those quads. So, again, my opinion on it, I'll get into some of the details of it in a bit. For me, that was not that big a deal. It was a $5 charge on a drone that was a couple $100. It's a couple of cups of coffee. And I'm not trying to be, haughty about it and say, oh, it's not that big a deal. It is a big deal. It's $5. But what it gave me was it gave me a database that if somebody did something stupid, ran into a building, he crashed into a car, they could trace that drone back to that knucklehead and punish that knucklehead. I'm not breaking the law, and I'm on a ton of databases out there already. If I break the law, I deserve to be punished. And I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, the bad guys aren't going to register their drones. Okay, so if they crash the drone and it's not registered and they find the guy, he's in trouble. If they crash the drone and he's registered into something that he shouldn't be flying near, he's still in trouble. So it's a win-win for me. And I know there's a lot of people that are very passionate about this erosion of our civil liberties and what's big government doing in our hobby. Can I fly my drone in my backyard? All of that's still possible. It's not like registering changes any of that. It's a very simple process. All it means is that that drone that I know you're flying responsibly is now tied to you. So if you don't fly responsibly, then you got to pay the consequences. And that's kind of how life works. All right, so that's what's changed as of today. Now, what was interesting to me is immediately there were press releases from a lot of large organizations. So on the one side of the fence, curiously, was the AMA. And the AMA is that organization that has pockets of people all over the country that fly together as a group, and they're a wonderful organization. I've been belonging to it for a lot of years. I like them a lot. I pay my registration fee every year. And it's a group of flyers that go out and fly together. Sometimes they have fields, sometimes they're flying together at different venues and stuff, but they came out against it. They said, this is a good thing for hobbyists to not have this registration. They felt like if you register with them, that should be enough. But my worry there is, and again, I know I'm being opinionated here, but my worry is that's a small pocket of registration. I don't think there's any coordination between them and the FAA or even coordination between states. Maybe there's a national database they put together, but then why would you complain about the federal government doing the same thing? It didn't make a lot of sense, and it was curious to me they came out against it. On the other side of it that said this was a disappointment were large companies like DJI came out immediately. Brendan Schulman came out and said, this is troubling because that database that was created gave the FAA at least a regulatory base. I'm not quoting, I'm paraphrasing, but at least a regulatory base to predict how things should go from that base, right? They now know the population that's registered, where they live, where they fly, what they fly. That's all positive stuff. It doesn't hurt us at all to have that database together. International organizations like AUVSI, which is another drone organization, but it's international, came out and said they were disappointed by it. So over the next couple of weeks, we'll see who comes up on either side. It's a bit of a tug of war right now between those two groups. But for me, it was curious that there wasn't a concerted opinion from everybody that it was a good or a bad thing. My personal opinion, and I know this is going to be controversial, is that I think it's a bad thing for a lot of reasons. And whenever I come up with a situation like this, and I've only had 3 hours to think about it, and 25 cups of coffee, is the good and the bad, the pros and the cons, right? So I put a T list together that say, here are all the good things that are going to happen because of this change. Here are all the bad things that are going to happen. And I'm being honest, when I put this list together, the things that were on the good list were minimal and they were minimally impacted. So it wasn't like they were big deals that I got out of this. The bad list, has the potential to be devastating. And I'll go through those individually in a second. So anyway, that's the back and forth between the companies. When I looked at the good list, what's good about this? I don't have to pay a $5 registration fee. I kind of talked about that before. I'm not saying $5 is not a lot of money. It is, right? A lot of us work hard for our money. I'm not going to take $5 and throw it out the window. But if it's something I believe in, like I did believe in this registration process and still do, I'm willing to pay $5 to sort of help the community and help the hobby be responsible. Because right now, like it or not, quads, the intelligent quads we fly, any quad really, it's kind of like the Wild West, where the public's not sure about what they think about them. There's rogue people out there that are buying them and doing stupid things with them. So there needs to be some sanity in that space. Who do you put in that space? It has to be a federal effort. It can't be state by state, because if I fly over a state line, then is it the same in Jersey and Pennsylvania? There has to be some national leveling of the law and leveling of the rules. And that's one of my pet peeves, is that now the states are starting to pop up with these popcorn regulations, and I'll get into that later. But nationally, there's a law that says the FAA is in charge of everything, the heavens, from the ground to the heavens. That's the regulatory space. They should be the people that put this together. So I think that I want them in charge. I want that database out there so that if bad things happen, they can at least have a decent effort at finding those bad guys. All right, so from the good side, I saved my $5. There's no more national database. So the people that were afraid of being in a national database, that's gone. Now, I don't know what they're going to do with the existing database. I'm sure that'll be on hold till they get a final regulation put together, or if they decide to appeal it or whatever. So it's probably on hold for now. I imagine if they're not going to pursue it, then they've got to get rid of the database. I don't know what they're going to do for the $5 registration fees, whether they'll rebate those or whatever, but we'll see where that ends up. So two things: I get my money back. I don't have to spend $5 a year, maybe. I also don't have to worry about the national database. And then the last thing, which again is, I completely understand the sentiment. A lot of people were afraid of sort of this creep of government, right? This infringement that the government likes to get into your business and get into your life. And any little creeping of inches of that kind of regulatory stuff troubles a lot of people. And I totally understand that sentiment. I didn't feel like this one, the little bit of encroachment on my liberties of flying my quad around, really was that big a deal when I weighed the benefits against it. And that's just me personally. I know everybody's got their own opinion. So the three things I get back: no fee, $5, no database. Not a big deal. I'm in a ton of databases. So for me, I don't break the law. And if I did, believe me, the drone's not going to be the thing that gets me in trouble, because everybody knows who I am from a database perspective. And last, less government involvement. To me, that was minimal. So the upside for me with all those pros didn't outweigh what I think the bad things could be. Let me talk about the cons. So again, I've thought about this intensely for the last 3 or 4 hours. I'm probably going to have a different opinion in a couple of days, or at least a more informed position as this develops. But I think the fundamental change is going to have probably devastating ripple effects, and that's a big word, but devastating ripple effects long term if this isn't reversed. If there isn't some way for the federal FAA, the Aviation Administration, to figure out the database of people that are out there, the population that are out there. So let me go through these. So there's 3 things I think that are going to be big topics of change, if you will. The first one is regulations. The second is going to be confusion, and the third is going to be restrictions. So let's talk about regulations for a second. We were moving in a really good direction with quads. We were starting off with a base level of regulations that said, I think pretty common sense regulations that said things like, don't fly over 400 feet because the planes are up there. Don't fly over people. Don't fly over buildings, that are going to be populated like stadiums and things like that. Always keep your quad in visual line of sight. So you needed kind of a base level to start with. This registration process for me was the underpinnings of that legislative space, because you have to first know who's going to be involved in the hobby and who's going to be involved in the activity, and then put those rules on top of the people that are in that hobby. I think that's a fair place to start. You take that registration layer out from underneath, now they don't know who's flying. How do they let people know who's flying, how the rules change, or how do they talk to the people that are flying to ask them, do you think it's a good thing if we relax this visual line of sight requirement? So we no longer have a population that the FAA can go to talk to, because there's no registration involved. So the regulations, I think, are in jeopardy. And I really believe that if you look across the globe, let's just look at Canada. I know I picked on them a couple of weeks ago because of their knucklehead registration or regulation process. That's what's going to happen. The US is in a situation right now where they had reasonable regulations that the rest of the world maybe isn't following as nicely, right? They're putting these draconian regulations in where you can't fly over animals, you can't fly within 75 feet of this or that. The US had pretty reasonable regulations. And as much as I'm a rule breaker, and I know, they put rules in and I try to play by them, but sometimes I can't, right? This is one of those cases where I follow the rules, and I think you guys as responsible flyers follow the rules. I like to have a set of rules so we're all playing by the same set of rules. And I think back to when I was a kid, the first thing you did when your mom or dad brought a new game home, at least we did, was break open the box, flip over the lid, and read the rules of the game. And then you at least all had a common understanding of what that game was about. The regulations are exactly that box top that you're reading to figure out what you can and can't do with your quad. And without this registration process, I think it's going to be chaos. So I think the regulations are going to suffer because of that. I think the progressive nature of the FAA looking to relax those regulations and introduce things like beyond visual line of sight, flight, goggles, whatever you want to use, I think those things were coming. The chaos they're in right now to deal with this issue is going to take their eyes off the ball that they would have been working on other things that are more progressive. So that bothers me. The next element of this is the confusion. Now, anybody that flies knows that the public at this point, the jury's really out with the public about what they think about quads. And it seems like every story that hits the news is about some near miss with a quad in a plane, which we all know in most cases is hyperbole. There's not a lot of, hyperbole. There's not a lot of planes and quads near misses and stuff, at least in the US. And as far as I know, there's never been a strike from a plane, but there's a lot of confusion on the public's part because they hear about the horrible things that could happen with a quad. I don't want it in my backyard. You're spying on my kids. So this is just going to increase the confusion even further because we're not a registered body anymore that has the FAA saying, we know who they are, we're here to help them, we're making them responsible pilots. So I think the confusion is only going to be amplified by this change. And even among the hobbyists, there's a lot of confusion as to where can I fly, when can I fly. So that bothers me a little bit. And the third and I think most damning part of this is that in the vacuum that's been created now of this confusion at a federal level, I think a lot of local municipalities are going to take matters into their own hands. And I've been a huge advocate for knocking off all these little popcorn regulations that are coming up, because nothing frustrates me more than having a federal regulatory agency say, Rick, you're a responsible pilot, register your quad, and fly by these 17 rules. These are the golden rules of flying. Stay under 400 feet, don't fly over people, don't get near buildings, that their people are in, and keep it within visual line of sight. You all know the rules. Well, that should be it. Right? And I've complained long and hard about little townships or little, beaches saying, well, we know better than the federal authorities. And in our town, you can't fly your quad here. Why? Well, how is it a bigger threat to you than the federal government knows? They've done the testing. They've put space rockets up in the air. They got airplanes flying all over, helicopters. They understand the national airspace and how to protect it. If they're comfortable with it, how dare you tell me you can't fly there? My worry is now that this is sort of in chaos a little bit and the FAA is going to have to focus on this aspect of it as opposed to the progressive nature of things, I think a lot of towns are going to sweep in and try and fill that vacuum. And I expect that a township, I could already picture it in my head, that there's a little township committee somewhere that goes, hey, did you guys hear that the FAA can't even force people that buy quads anymore to register them? We got to react. We got to do something to protect our citizens. And you're going to see these draconian, like Spanish Inquisition level kind of rules put in place that are going to clamp down on quads. And it may not be that big a deal if one park gets banned or one beach gets banned, but you start looking at a map and you see all those red circles start marrying up. Well, all of a sudden, like in Canada, 70% of the country, you can't fly a quad based on those kind of laws. And I'm worried that that's going to happen. And I think it's going to happen sooner than later because some of these communities have kind of been waiting because there's been a threat from the FAA, not overtly, but sort of as a subtext to say, sooner or later, we're going to come out there and tell you, you can't be abridging these laws. Like we have a law for the US, that's the law for the US as far as the airspace goes, you can't abridge those laws. That's not happening right now. So I think a lot of these townships that may have been waiting to put these bans in effect are going to sweep in and do these bans. And then even if that regulation comes back, it's going to be a bigger deal for the FAA to kind of unscrew all that stuff. So my concerted opinion on this is that I don't think it was that big a deal. And I know I'm probably going to take some flack to you guys for this. I want you to comment below and I want to have a conversation about it because I really want to understand what you guys are thinking in case I'm way off on this because I'm wrong on a lot of stuff. But this one I've thought through, been flying a long time, got a lot of pilots that are friends. We've been chatting all afternoon about what they thought about it. And the concerted opinion from responsible flyers is the registration was not that big a deal, and it provided a groundwork and a ground framework, if you will, for all the other things that are built on top of it that the FAA is trying to do on our behalf to benefit the hobby. Taking that away from them is a bad thing. I think it kind of undermines everything they're trying to do because they don't know what the population looks like. They don't even know how many people are going to be flying once they stop this process. They can't track sales, so the registration process is a way that they knew close to 1 million people have registered their quad since they started that program. That's a huge body of people that they're paying attention to. Now, we're all anonymous. And that knucklehead that you see flying a quad down the street in New York City or slamming into a building someplace in Seattle, you're not going to know who it is. And if that quad comes down and hits somebody, oh my gosh, right? I want to know who that knucklehead is so that the federal authorities and the local authorities can go to him and explain to him legally, and maybe with some prison time, that you can't be doing stupid things, because every time you do something dumb, it hurts me. And I don't like that, and you don't like that. So I know I'm going long about this, but my concerted opinion is this was a huge mistake. And I'm hoping that the FAA appeals this. I'm also hoping that Congress, who has a shot to rectify this when they renew this 2012 law, that they put a provision in there that says, as small a deal as this is, maybe make it no fee, but you have to register your quad. And there'll be penalties if you don't. I think it's a good thing. So again, I'm sorry if I offended you. I'm just always one to speak my mind on these kind of things. And I'm very passionate about this because I love this hobby. I love flying. And the last thing I want is for this to turn into chaos for everybody. And I think this kind of slippage could get us in that case or that state pretty soon. So anyway, that's my 2 cents for today. That's all I really want to talk about. If you guys have any questions or opinions, drop them below. I'm sorry if I offended anybody, but again, it's good to have opinions and I love conversation. So let's keep this going. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you guys are having a good time out there flying. And as always, happy flying.